Welcome to the Dr. Stacy Show, where we are talking about all things faith, love, and wellness. I'm your host, Dr. Stacy, and I am super excited to be kicking off the show today. This season, we are focusing on being made well. We are going to be talking to different folks in different spaces that really focus on helping people to celebrate their differences and celebrate who they are as they're designed. Today, I am super excited to have with us on the show Christopher Brown, who is the CEO of Full Being Services. He is an amazing, gifted, talented workshop trainer, teacher, speaker. Christopher and I actually met on a trip. I'll talk about that later. But Full Being Services as an entity really focuses on holistic care for people of color through services that are trauma informed and really look at the individual. He's partnered with the Juvenile Diversion Program in Philadelphia, ACOMA, which is a national organization that looks at increasing access to care for folks. Christopher has his LPC in Pennsylvania and New Jersey, is a diplomat in the American Academy of Experts in Traumatic Stress, and is certified in sex therapy as well. Christopher provides workshops, trainings, teachings, opportunities for adults, children, school systems, programs, you name it. Christopher and Full Being Service does it. Christopher, thanks so much today for being part of our show.
Thank you so much for the welcome and the invite.
Absolutely. So, Christopher, I tease because we met in a traumatic experience, but I have to tell everybody we met on a trip to Nigeria, actually doing presentation. And it was an interesting trip. Our flight got delayed. Remember that?
That's right. Yeah, that's how it started.
Yeah, but that's how the trauma started on the trip, right? Our flight got delayed. But no, all in all, it was a good trip. But one thing I remember about that trip is you presented and did presentations on trauma, right? And so that was kind of, even then, my introduction to you and your services, but this idea of trauma. And everybody is talking about trauma, whether it's on Instagram, whether it's on social media. We think about it in our spaces as therapists. Talk to me a little bit, I guess, about why is everybody talking about trauma and what should we know about trauma?
Yeah, I mean, people are talking about trauma. It's a lot more prevalent now, just mental health in general, which is great, right? There's more awareness, but there's also a lot of kind of buzzwords and kind of pop psychology kind of understandings that are out there, which I should really say misunderstandings because it's often, misinterpreted and, there's new phrases that kind of come up that doesn't necessarily have professional credence. But there's a lot more awareness about mental health and trauma in general. And especially as we look at things like social media and even the news, right? Where we are being exposed and re-exposed to traumatic events that aren't just traumatic in and of itself, but also being reframed contextualized in very harmful ways that, can be harmful against our identity, against our ancestry, against our background, against, our family and who we are as people, for some of us, even against our religious faith. So, yeah, I mean, just the understanding and the awareness of trauma has increased dramatically.
And Christopher, I love that you said like people are, becoming more aware, right? Because trauma shows up for us, even if we're not aware.
Mhm.
And when you think about how people are, I guess they're not using it correctly, what would be, I guess, a good definition of trauma and how do we define it to be clinically correct?
Yeah, I mean, I think probably a good definition for the average person would be, trauma is an event or circumstance that occurs that just overwhelms our body, our mind's ability to cope, right? So it is, in a sense, it's kind of an attack on our nervous system and our perception, struggle to make sense of the event at the time, at least.
Mhm.
And there's usually some type of sense of overwhelm, of hopelessness, of powerlessness. So it's a combination of those factors. And then those feelings kind of stay afterwards. So we're talking beyond just kind of lingering, where it's kind of like this reliving or this kind of it's staying. You're like reliving this moment. You're present in the past, so you're bringing the past with you, throughout your current life and, your future circumstances.
I love how you just said that, right? Because I think when we're working with people, the idea, right, of bringing that past trauma into where you are now, right? How does it show up in your life right now is really key, even when we're working with people. Talk to me a little bit about your work, specifically with people of color and trauma. Do we see trauma? Do we recognize it? What has been, because I love that you focus on that specifically as well. But what has been your experience?
Yeah, I mean, as just a brown person living in this country, you are exposed to trauma, right? We've been traumatized in some way, shape, form, or fashion. The question is to what degree? The question is, how are we dealing with it? How have we dealt with it? What types of supports have we had to work through it? Right? What type of supports do we have currently? So, what is our awareness level about how our body is reacting and handling, certain things? So, additionally, I mean, for us, a lot of times, I've seen that we're often and this is in clinical settings, like maybe underdiagnosed or our trauma goes under recognized. So it may present itself as other types of disorders, other clusters of symptoms that, if we really kind of peel back the layers and look at the core, kind of get to the root, you realize, this is it, whether it's cultural trauma, racial trauma, working through discrimination. And so what's when we think about trauma, one thing that people think about trauma is like all these big T's, like these car accidents, shootings,
Mhm.
plane crashes, which yes, absolutely, those are traumatic. But there's also the little T's that stack up. They have a cumulative effect. And things like racial discrimination, microaggressions, dealing with prejudice, and, we think about a lot of the things that are prevalent, more prevalent, I should say, in your face today with kind of the current atmosphere. I mean, you can be re-exposed every time you open the app. And so I just wanted to put that out there is, working through racial trauma, discrimination, like those things, those add up to full blown traumatic reactions.
And I love that you're saying big T versus little t, right? Because some people, right, are like, oh, well, I didn't experience this mega trauma event, but yet you have these little traumas that are just as powerful as an event to you, right? Like thinking about your physical response and how our bodies respond to trauma. Many people of color are going to their doctors because of stress responses, because of things,
Yes.
how our immune systems, our bodies, because we're experiencing stress every single day, although we're not recognizing as this big trauma event, but it is impacting us from a physical perspective. Talk to us a little bit, Christopher, about, because I know you and I were talking pre-show, that not all trauma is negative and that those experiences, they can have positive aspects. Talk to us a little bit about that in the trauma world.
Yeah. So one of the things that really impact how we deal with trauma is the meaning that we make of the experience afterwards. How do we perceive it? What are our thoughts about the world around us, our prospects, our hopes, our futures, but also about ourselves, right? Like, is there some level of self-blame? Is there shame associated with it, guilt? So then the thoughts about ourselves, but then also the feelings that we have associated with it and the feelings that we have associated with ourselves afterwards, our self-worth, etc. And so really, one of the things that really I don't feel like gets spoken on enough is post-traumatic growth, where like what happens after a traumatic event, right? What happens after someone has PTSD and has worked through it and has come to some kind of terms, with themselves or with the event. And now they're seeing and experiencing life in a new light, right? Like they develop some type of purpose or mission that was associated with the past trauma. And so the trauma is not necessarily, it's not who I am, but it helped me become who I needed to be. And so there's some level of purpose or mission oriented focus associated with their life and and where they're focused now because of the trauma. So I think that is something that it really doesn't get enough time,
Hmm.
covered, at least publicly. And that's something that, working with clients, it takes some time to get there. You don't want to just start there after something horrific just happened to, or you just maybe speaking on something horrific that's happened to you, years ago. But at some point, looking towards the future, like what is the meaning? How can I take meaning from this?
Mhm. But I love how you said that because it is the idea of the meaning that we make of what we went through, right? And so
Right.
being able to have that growth post-traumatic experience, many of us will say, I'm in that camp right now of like life after divorce, right? You've been through this experience that causes trauma, stress, all those kind of things. And it's like, who are you on the other side of that, right? Like becoming that person. But that's how we can experience trauma to say, but wait a minute, what did that experience teach me? How did I grow? How did I become, who I am today? And if it wasn't for that trauma, right? We talk about that too, that process, the crushing process sometimes that we go through in the experience. One thing when you were just talking, and I'm always listening for, things that will help the audience and people that are listening. And somebody that's going through trauma, that's having an experience, and maybe it is a big T, right? Maybe they experienced, a big T event in their life. What would you say are their steps? Like, what should people do to work through their trauma?
Yeah, I mean, I would lean towards community.
Mm,
And, in our kind of Western mental health, educational silos, a lot of times it's just kind of looking at the individual and, teaching them skills and, helping them to self-regulate and then working, processing, and which there's nothing wrong with that. But a lot of times what helps the trauma symptoms, trauma reactions to thrive is just being isolated, being alone, right? And if it doesn't have to make sense or be correct, but a lot of times, depending on the type of event, like you may see this a lot more with things like sexual abuse, but like a lot of shame and guilt can kind of thrive, when you're isolated and when you're alone. So like leaning towards community are the people that you can talk to that you actually trust, right? Are there people that you can be vulnerable with? Right? Who in your ecosystem can you lean on? But generally speaking, just like with anxiety, I mean, trauma thrives with avoidance as
mhm.
well. Right. So when you try to kind of push these things down and not face them, not deal with them, they will find ways to intrude in your life. Like you can't run from yourself. And so are you taking that time? How are you taking that time to actually face what you dealt with, to feel what you've dealt with, to
Mhm.
not kind of push away, negative feelings and thoughts, but try to understand it better. What is this side of me telling me about myself? What do I actually believe about myself? Right? Are we curious about ourselves versus just so uncomfortable that we don't even want to deal with it? Right? If you lock that door, it's going to find a window to come in.
And you said something about time there because one of the things I know in trauma world, we're talking about adverse childhood experiences, right? And so the idea that we could have experiences that happen, let's say when you were 5 and 6 years old, but then at 40, it's still showing up for you. And
Yeah.
that's talk to people about, I guess, is it ever too late to deal with your trauma of stuff that happened when you were younger?
Oh no, it's never too late. I mean, part of one of the beautiful things about being human, but just life on this planet is that, growth, like we are always growing until we die,
Mm.
right? Like we're on this arc where and growth slows down at a certain point, but it doesn't have to stop as long as we're here. And so how are we growing, right? I mean, physically, we stop growing at a certain point, right? Mentally, the brain has such plasticity that, as long as you're staying active, you're engaged, you're, crossword puzzles, Sudoku, reading, right? You're challenging yourself. I mean, the brain can last and be, fully kind of present and alert and aware long into, your 70s, your 80s, potentially beyond, right? Spiritually, right? How are you growing spiritually? How are you connecting to, your faith, nature, your creator? What is your understanding with like the universe, right? So there's certain areas where it becomes harder and more difficult to grow in, but as long as we're on this planet, the growth never has to stop. And so No, I mean, anytime something is impacting your life negatively, it may feel like you can be hopeless at times. It may feel like you can be helpless at times, powerless at times. And maybe for a time you are, but that season will pass at some point. So, what happens when you get to that next season of your life? What are you working on? What are you working towards? How are you addressing it? Or are you just kind of ignoring it?
I love that too. What are you working on in this season in your life? That I'm gonna take that nugget myself because I think we can always be growing and working. And I love how you said community because what we're finding, even with things that happened in our childhood, that we can heal those hurts and traumas by even having positive childhood experiences. So, the kid that had abuse, if we have a mentor, if we have now positive examples of love and care, that we can grow even from those experiences by our community and those that we surround ourselves with. So I love that. Christopher, you're doing speaking of community, now Full Being Services, you created because you wanted to come into community and create treatment opportunities that are for people of color. Talk to us a little bit about some of the unique things that you guys have done and how you bring treatment to our communities.
Yeah, so we wanted to ensure that, Black and Brown people really had access to qualitative holistic services. And we do that through a variety of ways. And so initially we kind of started with just out of network kind of private pay, and then quickly realized just that intersection of socioeconomic status, race, and ethnicity, we were missing a large segment of the people we wanted to support. So we started getting credentialed with several insurances, and we were able to work with a much larger population of people. But then we were still missing, it still felt like we were missing a core component of the people we wanted to support. And then we started forming several partnerships. And through those partnerships, we were able to connect with, basically the whole kind of spectrum of population here, in Philadelphia and throughout the state of Pennsylvania. And one of the ways we did that, so utilizing the height model, we ran, a hip hop trauma group. We did it for teens at one point, and then we did it for young men who all were victims of gun violence. And so, that's just kind of one example of that, but really finding unique ways to bring, bring treatment and bring an environment that promotes healing and collaboration, to the people. And another example would be like just one of the partnerships we have is with the DA's office, where we're able to work with youth all across the city who have been adjudicated. So, if they've been arrested for anything, well, I won't say for anything, but there's a spectrum of things that they could have been arrested for. And as long as they're in the juvenile justice system, we're able to provide them and their families free services. And then we also go out to special sites that help to not just keep youth occupied during certain hours, but they also teach them life skills. They help them with educational challenges. The teens build healthier and supportive communities amongst each other. Well, we go to those sites and we do workshops and things ranging anything from healthy social media use to mental health 101 to body image, gun violence. So yeah, and those are just some examples of some of the partnerships that we have where we can work with people that we recognize have a level of vulnerability that hasn't been addressed on our own terms.
I love that. And can you talk a little bit? Because I love that you even separated male, right? When we talk about like group and being able to specifically reach a population that, and I'm just going to say it, our males of color, when we talk about trauma, right? They get the little T's plus the big T's every single day.
Yeah.
And I love that you created programming. And I love the word evidence based, right? Again, we're creating programming that's evidence based, that has research to say it's effective for men of color. Talk to me about the response and what do you see from the young men, the males, the adults going through the trauma trainings and workshops?
Yeah, I mean, I think for one, we get a level of engagement that the professionals who work with them on a regular basis, they don't see that level of engagement. They haven't seen that level of engagement in kind of previous activities, previous mental health related topics. And so you tend to have an increased level of engagement. I mean, also, we are Black owned, all Black wellness collective. And a lot of us, we come with lived experience, right? So we have professional experience, we have the educational experience. A lot of us have at least some level of lived experience that we can connect with. And when we're talking about young people, generally speaking, I mean, authenticity is key, right? You have to be genuine. But, if there's some kind of similar footing, right? Whatever ground you can use to connect with a young person, then, you use that. And so being able to kind of see some version of yourself or like your future self in someone who's working from you, someone who can speak your language, someone who at least has some level of understanding, right? It's not based on stereotypes, it's not based on media, but some level of, like this person gets it, right? That opens the door for a different level of conversation, a different type of depth.
And I love the connection of even music and hip hop, right? Because this is something that we can take and just an example of one of your treatment approaches, but it's an example of something that we can take that may not have been created for therapy purposes. But how many people, how many young people listen to music just to get through their day,
Yeah.
right? Like this is
Yeah.
something I always tell people make a playlist because playlists are amazing, right? I got playlists for everything.
Yeah.
Even now saying, okay, how do I use this music to heal? How do I use it as a connection piece? How do I use it to talk about some of the most difficult things? I had a young man in one of my sessions, he writes rap to be able to express the trauma and things that he's dealt with in his life. And so listening to, him was again, it took me as a therapist to say, okay, let me let this into our space. Let me let this into our sessions and how we do treatment is him recording, him doing his reps, him then sharing with me
Mhm.
what that meant and how he's dealing with things. So I love that. Christopher, when you think about where we still need to go in the space of trauma work, and I know all of us, in the helping profession, we can see all the problems, we can see all the good programming that's out there. Where do you feel we still need to go in order to help people, even in the current times that we're in? Because there's so much going on that causes even those little T's on a daily basis. Where do you see that we still need to go?
And so one of the phrases you said earlier, I know this is such a buzzword in the mental health community and space, but like evidence-based practices. And, I always tend to pause when I hear evidence-based practices because we always have to ask, is evidence-based for who?
Mhm.
And who was this modality tested on, researched on? Who is it most effective for? And it doesn't take away the utility of the modality of the training of the manualized approach, but does it work for the people who are in this room with me right now?
Mhm.
And so I think also leaning towards experience-based approaches
Mhm.
where, a lot of it's just kind of funny how things work. A lot of things come full circle when we talk about how the field started and Freud and Jung and Adler and, Carl Rogers, behaviorism all the way up to now, where it's like so many of these things in this field of psychology that are now considered tenets that are ubiquitous, and it's like you can't be an effective therapist without any of these things. They were present in indigenous cultures before
Mhm.
this field of psychology even existed, but just because it wasn't considered evidence-based, right, there was no research done on it, through that Western lens, that it wasn't considered valuable. And because we have a group of professionals who then decided, oh wait, these things make sense, let's figure out how we should integrate it versus let's mirror, let's just integrate how it was done in the past. Like now it's considered valuable. So I think going back to what are some indigenous practices and music, right? So look at a lot of, especially like West African culture, where music was integrated into everything, all types of ceremonies and rituals that weren't, at times they were for healing, but even the ones that weren't, the focus wasn't healing, it had a healing impact.
Mhm.
And so, how can we dip into the wisdom of our ancestors, apply it to how we live in our experiences, right? Making it experience based to connect with more people. How do we get the funding for that without, people in white lab coats saying, we have to look at this over, this 10 to 20-year period and apply it in a way that works for this group of people and say it's universal. And so I think that is probably where we need the most growth.
Yes. And I love how you said it because I think about even like schools who are doing community circles, right? Or morning circles. And I'm like, indigenous people were using circles to heal, right? Even if you talk
Yeah.
about Africa and they did drumming in circles, right? Like the
Mhm.
drumming that we're bringing back into these spaces too now in schools. And it's like coming back to what we know heals the human body, right? That sense of
Mhm.
community, like you said earlier as well, is being able to heal the trauma is they came together to be able
Mhm.
to heal what was happening within their community. So, Chris, as we close out, what would be give maybe your tip, a final thought on trauma for maybe someone who's experienced trauma that might be hesitant to get help? What would be your advice to them?
My advice would be you don't have to be alone with whatever you're dealing with.
Mm,
That you may, even if you feel alone where you are, there are professionals out there, right? And even if you don't see a professional, faith leaders, somebody in your ecosystem, that there is support. You don't have to be alone, and that there is light at the end of the tunnel.
I love it. I love it. All right, Christopher. So, being a guest on my show, you have to humor me with
Okay.
a Laffy Taffy joke of the day. I always tell people,
Mhm.
scripture says that a joyful heart is good medicine. All of us remember our Laffy Taffy candy, right? So now, if you don't get, it's okay. I've only had one person out of all my shows so far get their Laffy Taffy joke. But you're
Okay. I'm ready.
all right. Here we go. What did the math book say to his doctor? What did the math book say to his doctor?
Mm,
I'm full of problems.
okay. All right. That makes sense.
I try to make my Laffy Taffy jokes related somehow to our topic. So that was our trauma, full of problems. Great. So Christopher, tell everybody how can they connect with you? How can they get in touch with Whole Being Services? Give us all of your handles, all that good stuff so people can connect with you.
Absolutely. So, Full Being Services, we are on LinkedIn, a Full Being Services page. We're also on IG at full_being_services as well. I mean, there you can see some like pictures from our workshops and things that we've done, around the community. And additionally, you can also check us out on our website, fullbeingservices.com. So, in case you haven't noticed, the theme here is just the name, Full Being Services, website, IG, LinkedIn. If you want to shoot us an email, if you have questions, support at Full Being Services as well.
Awesome. Thanks, Christopher. So, folks, before we go, I'd like to do our Love the Babies Well segment today, where we talk about really how we care about our children. And so, as we heard today, although trauma is something that we sometimes cannot avoid for our kids and families, we do know that we can heal through community. As Christopher said, bringing back some of our traditions that surround people so they're not alone, that they can heal with support and with one another. I think about the fact that we are raising up the next generation and they are walking through their experiences based on how we've even handled our own trauma. So, parents, I encourage you to get support for yourself, but also get support for your young people. Thanks so much, folks, for tuning in to the Dr. Stacy Show. Until next time, keep the faith, love the babies, and pursue wellness.